Your ability to communicate and rationalize and absorb things from other humans is the scarce resource in a lot of ways, right? Like the ability to write code isn't a scarce resource.
Well, coding is easy. Coding itself is easy. Writing the correct code is hard.
Coding is the easy part. The hard part is understanding what you need to build and keeping it healthy and all those different things in the full application lifecycle. Welcome to Tech Council, your go-to podcast for mastering the art of building in the enterprise world. Join hosts Duncan and Jason Ehmke as they unpack the strategies, tools, and insights you need to drive innovation at scale. Brought to you by DevGrid, we're here to empower developers, tech leaders, and enterprise builders. Hit subscribe, and let's dive into today's episode. Back to another episode of Tech Council to talk about building the enterprise, and we've got an interesting topic today that we've sort of spent some time thinking about. And Jason, I think I want to kick it over to you pretty quickly. Just as a leader, or even as a dev, what are some of the key things you talk to your teams about, or to your bosses, or even to yourself? Like, how do you think about the job of value creation in the enterprise?
Yeah, it's hard to. I guess you'd say it's easy to lose sight of that in a large enterprise. There's a lot more overhead than you might be used to in a small startup. With us, with our startup, it's minimal overhead. We have some, of course, there's some overhead, and you got your SOC audits and whatnot. But in a large enterprise, it's easy to just get swallowed up by the overhead. So when you've got a dev starting out, it's a reminder of why are we here? Like, what are we doing? What is the mission? What are we focused on? And that's prime directive number one, is to just keep your eyes on the mission. And the rest of it is it's overhead. But I think the spiciest take on it is actually from you. You have a pretty direct way of communicating with your teams on this, and I've tested it out. I workshopped it a little bit, but it's eye opening for a developer to be spoken to very directly about, what are you getting paid? If you were if you were writing the check for your work, would you be happy with that outcome or the output?
Yeah.
And I think that's when I heard you first say that, I was a little bit shocked of the directness there. But actually, I think it's a really powerful statement to have with your team. It kind of unfolds in a couple of different ways. That one is that you have such a good relationship with your teams that you can have a direct conversation like that, and two is that it takes guts to talk to your team so directly, because those are the things you don't really hear in an enterprise. You're typically so afraid of saying something because there's it can go a lot of different directions of something that direct and blunt, but hearing that it's refreshing, and it's actually quite powerful to hear.
It was I know what you're talking about. I can tell that story, right? Like there was a team. So this was a team that worked for me. They were in my organization, but they were all 2 and 3 downs. But they were struggling. Like that team was like, they weren't delivering anything, and they just weren't focused, and they were kind of getting caught up in the day-to-day very heavily. And it's funny, it's become kind of a staple. And like you mentioned, other people do this now too, right? Like, but it was very organic for me. I just, what happened was I had just written an enormous check to have our HVAC systems fixed or replaced or whatever at our house. And so like, I knew that visceral pain of having this big chunk of money go out the door. And it was very fresh for me. And then I walk into a sprint planning or sprint retro. I can't remember. I guess it was retro and planning combined. And this team is talking about all the work they did and all those different things. And then I just kind of stopped everybody, and I was like, let me tell you guys a story. Let's imagine something.
And this, for those of you who don't know Duncan very well, this is the time where you start getting your popcorn out, because you go on mute, you start listening, and sometimes they are the best conversations that you'll ever hear.
Yeah, well, I mean, not everybody feels that way, but
not at the receiving end.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the cool thing is over time, people end up, to your point, there's a trust that grows when you're really willing to be honest with people. But initially it can be a little shocking. But the story, the way it went is I said, hey, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to all pull up your board for the last sprint, filter it on you, just you. I'm not going to do it. I want you each to do it individually, filter, and I want you to look at what you got done. You personally got across the line. And then I want you to think about some basic math. And I threw out essentially a blended rate from an engineering, what they might cost for at the company. I think I estimated it a little low so as not to make anybody feel bad, but I basically worked out this number that ended up, and then we did the basic math and said, okay, over a sprint, divide that number by 26, for 2-week sprints. And, the number was somewhere in the $5,000 to $8,000 range. I forget exactly. I was like, that's the number. And so what I want you to do is I want you to pull the work, think about that number. Let's say it was $7,000 or $7,500. I want you to think about that number. I want you to pull up that board and I want you to imagine yourself writing a check to pay for the work that you got done. The reaction was shocking to them. Like, I think it was just like this massive, like, oh my God moment for a lot of the team because no one thinks about it that way. Nobody
ever
thinks
talks to them like that either, though.
No.
Those are the harsh realities that you typically don't hear because there's a disconnect between those who are doing the work and they think that it's just, oh, well, I'm doing my job and then doing the work that is in front of me and I've completed the job, the task.
Yeah.
And there's a big disconnect.
It's not, we don't think it, and that's the whole reason we're having this conversation today, right? Like people don't think about value creation. Like there's this weird thing that's happened in our society where it's like, I have this job and this job pays me money. And there's like, I don't want to say entitlement to it, but like there's this strange presumption to it that I don't fully understand that, us being entrepreneurial ourselves, it's for us, it's a much different thing. Like we could, we have a sense of ownership over it. I understand if you're an employee that isn't a major owner in a company, it's a different dynamic. Certainly been there myself. But one of the things we try to kind of help people understand is, and bring to the forefront, especially for engineers, because let's be honest, as engineers ourselves, I mean, my God, are we spoiled, right? Like we've been in such demand for the last 10 or 15 years. We've, just gotten away with murder, basically. We've been paid really well. We've been treated really well. I mean, not universally, obviously, but as an industry and as a skill set, software engineering has been a pretty cake place to be over the last decade or two. So there's kind of a fat and lazy dynamic that's there. And so what I try to help people do is kind of what you're saying is, hey, this is still a transaction, right? Like we're a team. We care about each other. We care about our development, all those different things, but it's still a transaction. You're still getting paid to deliver value, right? And it's, it's not always the sprint example of like, look at your tickets and all that type of stuff. It's good illustratively. It doesn't tell the whole story. Obviously, there's a lot of things people do that provide value that don't get captured in a Jira board or linear or whatever it is you like, for sure. And I'm not, the point is not to say that that's all that matters, but the point is to say, hey, think about your time in that way. Think about everything you do in that way as you're there to move the needle, to be a change agent, to push things forward, especially as a software engineer, because you're such an empowered role compared to most corporate jobs are just paper machines. You're just moving something from one category to another. But as an engineer, you're actually creating value. You actually have the opportunity to create value and automate things and generate revenue and save money and all these different things that you should always be kind of pushing in that direction. But I want to ask you, because you've just most recently been running these teams at big banks, and what do you say when an engineer responds to like what I just said? It's like, well, I don't get to choose our backlog. How do I make sure I'm shipping value?
I kind of say, you own the implementation, maybe not the outcome in every single time, but the implementation of how you do something. Well, that's how you control your next steps here, is that, meet the outcomes, right? You don't get to choose the outcomes in every single step of the way, but that's, there's balances there. It's, you own the how, not the what, but the how is sometimes the most important part of things, where you've now delivered your ticket, so to speak, and you've completed your task. But how you do that can set you up for success further down the road in the future. And you can now look at, well, how can we deliver things like that better in the future? And how can you flex your technology muscles to say, hey, this really isn't good enough. This, it meets the outcome technically speaking, but it could be better. We could be shaving off another 500, 600, 700 milliseconds. Oh, those error rates there, those aren't good enough. Those don't meet our standards, right? Yes, they meet the checkbox. They meet you have now built an interface that can provide data to a customer. Okay. But there's so much more that you haven't talked about. There's so much more that, your resiliency, your recovery, your dead letter queue, all of those implementations that aren't really thought about. It's it's your non-functional requirements. The technology team owns, the vast majority of those, of how to make sure that's a good experience for the customer, and how to make sure that the next time you're asked for a task like this, well, yeah, okay. Well, before it was going to be 40 points of work to do, but now because of the optimizations that you put in, the cleanup that you've done along the way, and owning that outcome better, that's only going to be 10 now. That actually
Yeah,
speaks a lot of volumes for, for the technology team, that you're looking forward to things. I
I
remember
like
having
that.
these conversations with some product owners and directors and senior directors of products. Like, hey, look, you know what, we're going to do some investment here, and it's saying we're going to put some work in here. Now, you're asking me for work. Without these optimizations, it would have been 30 points of work. I'm going to squeeze in a little bit extra work here. We're still going to deliver on your schedule that you need, but next time you ask for anything in this app, half the time is going to be taken to build on it. And that speaks a lot to, not only are you thinking of the now, you're thinking of you're delivering your value on the schedule, but you're also thinking of the future for making sure that this is a good implementation for the team, and it's a good implementation for the customers. And you're thinking future to make sure that the customers have the best experience. And that's really, at the end of the day, what matters is, is the customers. Now, the customers could be, end users, it could be, other developers. But the point being is that owning that outcome by implementing the best way you can. And that
Yeah.
really gets the developers, gears spinning quite a bit.
So you said a few things there. Let me recap it a little bit, right? And maybe paraphrase it, and you can tell me if I'm hitting it right. So I would say, if you don't control the what, make sure you own the how, right? Like, so there you're talking about, make sure the quality is up as good as possible. Understand what matters from a quality standpoint. A performance if you're in e-commerce, the performance speed matters, exponentially more than in other industries. So, spending time optimizing there, the business may even ask you to do that, but certainly you do that on your own. Also thinking about the wider space of thinking valuable, not just on the business delivery of shipping that item, whatever that feature is or that ask is, but also thinking about, as you move forward, how do you make sure you're not stacking up debt and you're paying down debts? And so that's a whole other discipline about balancing, delivery versus debt pay down, or maintenance would be a kind of an easy way to say that. Because obviously, like if you're driving a car and you've never changed the engine's not going to last as long. So those are good things. I think, the other thing I would mention, right, like, is when you're working in these big companies, it's one of the things that's really interesting. Certainly saw this in the banking world. Um, Sometimes it's very easy to lose sight of the marketplace.
Mhm.
And what do I mean by that? Like, what I mean is, like, in my time at some of these banks and stuff, you spend all your time, it's so much of your time is fighting the bureaucracy of the company and just trying to get stuff done through the armies of people that have their own agenda that are preventing you from doing the thing you need to do in order to move the business forward. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where these things take on a life of their own. These bureaucracies of, compliance and risk and all these things that are kind of necessary, especially at a bank. But but they also don't really care about the incentive structures aren't in place for them to actually care about, the business actually running as well. And so you're kind of left in the breach, so as it were. And I think one of that does cause this problem. I think it lends to this problem of you're actually, you spend most of your time competing or fighting with the rest of the company and not competing and fighting to win in the market.
And we've seen this a couple times, right? We've seen individuals who are at startups. We've worked with a lot of customers and a lot of different companies, and there seems to be a trend where you might have a really strong leader, developer, individual, executive coming in. They were nimble at a startup. They were working in their career in startups, and then they get to a large enterprise, and their effectiveness drops by 75%. And they get overwhelmed by some of the overhead of the enterprise. And they're very strong of what they're doing. They know their stuff. But why do you think that is? Like, why do you think they just come into a new environment and then frazzle out?
Yeah. Well, and it happens a lot the other direction too, right? Like somebody's a big time leader at a large enterprise, and then they go into a startup and they just can't get. They just like sit and wait for things to happen instead of being action oriented. I think it has to do with a few things. I think it's an orientation towards action versus delegation. I think the people that do well in startups are able to do both, right? Like your leaders are people that will just get in there and do it themselves, because sometimes it's faster to do it than to explain it to someone else. Although, to be fair, the AI agents are completely flipping that on its ear. It's totally wild. But that's a conversation for another day. But in the corporate environment, you just can't do that, right? Like you're so inundated with paperwork and bureaucracy and meetings upon meetings upon meetings that, as a leader, it's really irresponsible for you to go and do stuff like that, because you have armies of people that are meant to do that work, and your job is to get them oriented in the right way. So I think that's the reason for why, enterprise people struggle in startups. And I mean, it was an adjustment for me. I mean, you saw it firsthand at Passport. Like, I was pretty startup oriented as a personality type, but coming from B of A and having a big team and a big budget and all those different things, and then going into Passport, I mean, it was an adjustment. So some would say I'd never made that adjustment. And figuring out like, I went from probably one of the most stable infrastructure and deployment environments in the world to, we just SSH directly into the box during an incident and just literally tweak code on box with Nano or whatever through SSH. So like it was just totally different upswing there. I think in the other direction, it's much more about your ability to navigate people and navigate an organization, right? Like we talked about before. I mean, I mean, you know this, right? Like, it's so complicated. There's so many more people, right? If nothing else, right? Like, there's just more personalities and friction points and leverage points and all these different places where there's a process that someone can throw, because all these enterprise processes overwhelmingly are designed to catch problems rather than accelerate progress. Right? They're all risk oriented. Someone did something stupid, and so they put a process in place, and then they put another one, and then another one, and another one, and another one.
Go over the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and that's rational to a degree, right? Like the second and third order effects of doing that are completely extraordinarily terrible, but it makes sense. And if you understand that, then also now you've got, I think I had a procurement process where there were 17 approvers that had to click yes on something, right? And if there's 17 different groups that have to approve something, like the ability for something to get stopped is just 99% of the time, right? And so you just have to understand that.
Like procurement is a different beast where it's, I can kind of get some of the friction there.
Procurement, perfect example, like perfect point, right? Like, it's a really good point. Like procurement is like the most perfect expression of that dynamic, right? Where there's literally like the software, there's literally software tools built around this. No one likes them. They all hate them because they're built to create friction, right? To your point. Now, but that's a microcosm or a highly specialized example of what happens in a lot of other ways though, right? Like in an enterprise environment, if you actually, I'll give you an example, tell you a story. I had a guy that worked for me. He was running SRE for digital, right? Like, so it was a pretty good job, pretty big job. It was the most important SRE team in the bank. And, he was a director level guy. And I came to him one day because I was getting inundated with all these, compliance emails and all these different things about this stuff that was out of compliance. And it was an app that was against my name, an app ID in the system that I'd never heard of. Like I didn't know what it was. And so I asked him about it, and he got really upset with me. And it's like, well, I'm the director of, because I didn't know anything about it, and it was something he just went and done because he thought it was a cool idea and they were going to build some specialized AI analytics thing or whatever. And I was like, did you not think that you're going to talk to me? Like, why didn't you check with me or anything like that? And he's like, well, I'm the director of SRE. I should be able to do that. And I should have the authority to do that. And I thought about it for a hot minute because I was like, that's a fair point, but I'm still pretty irritated and think that was irresponsible. So how do I reconcile those two things? And what I said back to him was, here's the thing. There in an enterprise environment like this, there's the authority to do something, and then there's getting buy-in to do things. If I go do things that I have authority to do, technically, without getting buy-in from the key stakeholders, which almost always includes your boss and your peers and whoever it is, depending on the circumstance, it's just not going to go well. And so, yeah, technically you're right, but it's a lack of judgment to think that you should just go unilaterally do that. And I think that, by the way, not well received, probably wasn't well delivered either, but, that was a complicated situation. But the point being, if you haven't grown up and been taught those things, these are not normal behaviors. You don't normally have to do this. You should just be able to look, you want to paint your house, you go paint your house, right? Like you want to, I don't know, dig a hole, plant a tree in your backyard, you dig a hole, plant a tree.
Yeah,
like people aren't
goes what you're asking for before about the delivery teams, owning the outcome, but the implementation is, that's on you. You want to, test out some new library to squeak out some additional performance. Well, that's where you can flex your muscles there and own that a little bit more, because you don't have to do it exactly a certain way. You do it the right way, using the right tool for the job. And back to the procurement thing for a second, though, I think that friction actually makes a ton of sense. As we've seen, you get into some of these enterprises and you see that there's 4 or 5 tools that do the exact same thing.
Mm.
And now you've got 5 bills for tools that could be consolidated. So had there been maybe a little bit more friction and people not just doing whatever they want to do to bring in, building a whole new tool, that some of these companies can save millions of dollars by consolidating down to a single tool set.
Totally. And here, Jason having more compassion for the procurement people. You can tell who deals with procurement all the time.
Yeah, it was hard. It is hard. It's hard on both sides of things as the buyer of it, and now on the other side where you're the seller of it, is that they're stuck in the middle too. So I have a lot more compassion now than I did before.
Totally agree. I mean, I totally agree. What I would, if I was going to push back on that, right? Like those things exist. The thing is like they exist for a reason, right? Like it's not like somebody just one day said, let's put 17 steps in this business process. Like that, those things that calcification builds up over time for a reason. Some of it's because of a lack of efficiency and a lack of reinventing themselves and auditing their processes and saying, how can we make them better? Are they outdated? Can we automate this process or automate this check? Those types of things. Can we have a research agent that scrolls through all the systems and comes back and gives a report instead of asking 7 different people to give approval on the same thing, that they're just, all those different things. So you're right. The pushback I would give though is it's beyond like, hey, are they actually doing that? Are they actually achieving what you're talking about? Because they're making themselves feel better that they might be achieving that. But we still see those things happen. We still see the redundant systems get
Well, yeah, I
get
mean,
bought and
there's
stuff like that.
deficiencies,
So
absolutely,
so
and
they're trying, but it
yeah,
is what it is.
that's the
As
whole
I
reason you're building some of the capabilities that we are into our
totally
system. That to help discover what capabilities do you have in some of these vendors that you might not be using before you buy something else.
the number of banks or just companies that we've talked to, not getting into it too much, right? Like that cannot reconcile the technologies, the applications, the contracts, and the vendors. They can't reconcile those things. They have those are in 3 or 4 different tools, and they have no reference to them, so they don't know what's paying for what contract pays for what thing, and what technology, what applications use what technologies, et cetera,
Or
et
it's the
cetera.
tribal
Like,
knowledge of some developer who, oh, they were just their contract just expired 2 weeks
yeah,
ago. Sorry,
yeah,
they're the only one who knew how this thing worked.
exactly. So to your point, some of this problem is exactly why we built DevGrid and why we're continuing to expand these capabilities is to give that kind of end jobs view of your technology. It's definitely a main driver because we've been there, right? Like I've been tasked by a CIO on the inside to say, hey, go and find me the most egregious, you know, the egregious software spends that we can get rid of. I spent 2 months with some really smart people looking at it, and we fundamentally came back and said, hey, here's a 12-month data conditioning plan. Basically, was the best we could come up with, because there was no understanding of what the impact of anything was, and so we would have to either do that manually or build some sort of model or whatever. So yeah, that's definitely a mess, but we've gone down a really crazy rabbit hole.
Well, but it all comes down to delivering value, though. That's kind of coming back to the
Yeah,
first principles, as we say, is that when we're looking to provide value out of our team, it does it goes under a lot of different topics. It's the tool. There's people, process, and tools, right? And so if you're having to procure new tools, well, that's overhead that you're not providing value because you're spending time and energy trying to get a new tool where you might actually have something already. And it's people, it's processes on top of that. So this is all very related into how to provide value versus not.
yeah, no, it's true. It's totally true. So let's go down to like the 100-foot level, right? If I'm an engineer, say early in my career to not super senior engineer, but somebody who's kind of, a good performer on a sprint team, right? Like what, obviously we've given some tips here, but if they're saying like, hey, how do I continue to be successful? How do I make sure I'm delivering something useful and something valuable? Like, what are the good questions to ask myself, essentially?
I can answer that with describing how somebody would be acting on a team, and that's we've had those developers who are quiet. They just pick up a ticket, the ticket gets done, and they're it's unit tested, it works, no defects. Yeah, by the definition, they are providing what they're being asked to do. But there are also the developers who are more interactive on a team. They're asking a question. Well, why are we even doing this? the, the funny thing is that if I were to measure this, I would probably say if you were to ask that 50% of the time in a sprint plan, in a grooming session, or in even going up a level or two, people don't ask, why are we doing this? And sometimes the answer is, well, I have no idea. Let me go ask. And then, oh, I don't know why we even have this in our backlog because we don't need it anymore. So that's
That
actually providing value.
the avoidance of work is giant value creation.
Yes. Because
Absolutely.
now you can
Yeah,
do
that's a huge
something
one.
else to pull something else in because you're not providing something that's useless, because that's negative value at that point.
So let me ask you this. So as someone who's dealt with this problem for most of my career and continued to be an amateur in solving it, I would say, how do you be that guy or gal who says, why are we even doing this, without being labeled or having labeled as just difficult and having everybody roll their eyes and, like not just being this kind of contrarian pain in the butt person, but like doing that thoughtfully? Like, how do you do that thoughtfully in a way that doesn't burn your credibility with everyone and just have them write you off as you're just a complainer who just says everything's stupid.
Yeah, it's first off, don't be a complainer. That's just don't complain about it. If your first, I guess your first choice is to go with a complaint. Hold your breath for a second, and don't go with your second choice. Go with your third choice. You've expired all the other options. Breathe for a minute. But really, you want to go about it you want to show that you're trying to understand the outcome. And so, hey, look, I'm a little bit disconnected here. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with what we're building here. Can you help me understand what we're looking for here? What's the purpose? And just to make sure that we're clear and we can execute the best that we possibly can. And that's a very clean, clear, and gentle way of saying, why are we doing this? Because you're showing an effort to be a team player. And that goes with at any level, right? I've said that in my roles, saying, hey, you know what? I want to make sure that we're executing and I can be clear on the implementation to the teams. Can you just help me understand the purpose of this? Where is this rolling up to? What what initiative is this supporting? So I want to make sure that my teams are set up for the best success they can. And sure, I'll get back.
Asking why is never going to be bad. Asking why. It's not like when you're a kid.
Yeah, you have to smooth it over.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that's exactly the right answer. Is be curious. Don't it was the Ted Lasso thing. Be curious, not judgmental, right?
Always be curious.
But it's like just be curious. If you can approach it with a tone of curiosity, like, oh, that's interesting. Why are we doing this? Like, what's the rationale?
You can even say, hey, I missed the first couple meetings. Can you just get me up to speed with things?
Yeah,
it's a hard thing to do, right? It's you go into a meeting, you've got all these big titles in the meeting, you've got all these other people who are super smart in there, and you don't want to be the person that says, why are we doing this? But the times that nobody else has asked that question, and they're all thinking it, or they're all thinking, I don't want to be that person to ask, why are we doing it? But I've gotten messages that thank you for doing that. Thank you for asking, because I don't, nobody else is doing that. And so being that person, that guy, that girl, whatever, people don't want to be that person either, but they applaud those who do.
Yeah, it's scary. Like we talked about this the other day, right? Or last time we spoke, or maybe the time before. Caring goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of GIF goes a long way. And so, and in order to care, you need to understand. And if you can't understand, then maybe it's flawed, right? And I mean, we saw this, right? Like we saw business leaders doing things that didn't make any sense.
They come in so confident, right? They come in so confident, and you say, oh, they're so confident. How can I even second guess them?
Yeah. And then you ask for things like success criteria and you watch them crumble because they haven't actually thought it through. They just really want the PR, to be able to say, I did this thing. Look how cool I am. Right. And there's a lot of that, right? Like there's a lot of that. And people, and again, back to incentives, right? Like the incentives in these organizations, if you're a technology leader, it's like, well, this business leader's coming with tens of millions of dollars of budget that funds my organization. Who am I to question what he or she wants to do? Right. Like, cause they're my customer. So I'm not going to question it. And it's like, well, yeah, I get that. But at the same time, like at the ground level, if you're going to do the work, you need to understand why. What's the outcome?
We had this conversation.
Be amazing. Sorry, go ahead.
No, we had a really in-depth conversation on this exact topic of, just because you have tens of millions of dollars to spend doesn't mean you should. You have to spend it responsibly.
Yeah, and I know when I was at B of A and we were in the sales and servicing space for digital, which is basically the homepage and all the authenticate, all the flows, and then all the sales flows, and then obviously online banking. That they were super disciplined about every project coming through was tied to units getting shipped, right? Like, so there was a sales target tied to the work. Now, whether or not that ever got followed up on really well and how they did attribution and stuff, that stuff's always flawed. But at least from a mentality standpoint, and everyone knew down to the engineers coding it, what the expectation was. Like we were trying to add an extra, 10,000 mortgages sold by this rewrite or whatever. per month or whatever, whatever the number was. I'm making that up, obviously. But and then other places don't do it that way. Other places are doing it based on vibes, and and there's something to be said for doing stuff on vibes. But the problem with it is eventually you end up with a leader that wants to be data driven, and then the people that have been doing stuff on vibes are completely screwed. Um, we have some friends that are going through that right now, and that transition is going from a vibes based management leadership structure to a data driven one is it's not fun, I would say. And there's a lot of both have their merits. It's not like one's better than the other. But there's a lot more strictness in the data driven one that is empowering, but when you're used to the other, it's quite the shock to the system. And so it's definitely something that's worthwhile. But
Well, I had a team that was more connected to the business than others. It was kind of threw everybody in a melting pot and go figure it out. And so it was a long road to get to a point where people were executing and providing value. But I can say when you have the right people in the mix and you have the right metrics being thrown out and you have the developers truly understanding what is like, not just what am I building, but what are we trying to do for the customer? What value are we providing? And those conversations help the team see better of where are we going? Like, why does this matter? And sometimes why does this matter is the right question to ask of, why are we here as a team? Why does this application exist? And so hearing straight from the horse's mouth of what they're trying to accomplish is empowering for the developers because, now they can, I hate this term, but see around corners of, what could be coming, and they can make sure that they have escape hatches built in such a way to make sure that these new pivots, these new changes coming in can be adopted successfully without, reinventing or rebuilding the entire app 4 times over.
Yeah, I know. That's a really good point. I want to come back to something you said earlier. I teased it apart. You said something around, there's the developers that just come in, clock in, grab a ticket off the board, get it done, and then move on, and they don't really contribute to the non, the in between work and the thought work with the team and stuff like that. How does that? We talk about this a lot. Like, what do you see the value? How does the value creation hypothesis of an individual contributor software engineer change over the next few years with the addition of Cursor and Devin and Copilot and all the AI tools? Do you see that? Well, I won't tee it up, but like, what do you think about that?
I think you're still going to see those who are just, I've seen it on the teams. You've got somebody who can just take a bunch of tickets, crush their work. They're going to rebuild the app if it's needed to. You're not going to hear from them the entire week. And they come back. They've doubled their output of everything that they put together. And so I think these AI tools will help them deliver more work at their speed. Right? It'll be a force multiplier there. And then you've got those who are the thinkers, and they are the architects, and they're going to be the ones who can think and maybe potentially use these tools a different way. There's the tools that help you say, okay, I need to build this new feature, need this new function, and then they'll go tweak it and they'll write some tests for it and they'll ship it. But then you've got those who just really get into the details. And I think there's still a place for both. I had this conversation with a leader at a bank recently, and it was a really good conversation because, when you were putting into these requirements into Cursor or Devin, it's going to check the box with what boxes that you've opened up to it. It is going to make sure that it just meets your needs. Now, the needs that it knows about. But now, we even messed around with this on our own when we saw that post on X about make the app run faster. And it did things that we wouldn't have thought about of suggesting in there because that's the scope that it had. And so when you're putting it into these tools, a developer's a strong technical developer who really knows how a language works. They're going to be able to see those right away and give those tools the instructions in a way that makes the app performant, makes the app, manage memory properly. And now you've got the others who are going to get the job done. They're going to get a lot of work done. They're both going to get a lot of work done, but you need a balance of both. So have that really strong technical developer can still leverage the strengths of the language without building up technical debt.
So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. I don't entirely disagree because God only knows what's going to actually happen. But the point I was sort of driving at was the people that are sort of an island to themselves that island's going to get more and more isolated, right? So if you're an engineer that just is like, all right, give me my ticket. I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm going to code my thing out because I'm a savant, and then I'm going to give it back to you. Even if it's not that obnoxious, they don't collaborate with the rest of the team. I feel like to your point, their output might be better, but I mean, certainly would be better with these tools. I think, we both experienced it for ourselves. That the tools are fantastic, and they're not perfect, obviously, but to me, it feels like going from a typewriter to a word processor, and in terms of the amount of speed and efficiency it provides. And so, like, anybody that gets comfortable using them will get better with it, will be faster. So that's certainly true. The point I was sort of driving at, though, is that it makes that exploration of the why that much more important, right? Because shipping the code is going to get easier and faster. And to your point, you still need an expertise level to do it properly. And it's not like you can then just turn this over now to somebody who's not technical. But if you think about it this way, the person who's a great collaborator, but maybe not as fast as the person who's kind of does things on their own, maybe they're 70% the same speed. Well, that great collaborator might become 3 times as fast, whereas the other one might only improve by a certain percentage because their understanding of everything is not going to grow as fast as the person who's the great collaborator. So
I think there's a balance on that, though. I think it depends on what you're trying to do. If you have a highly technical product that you have a lot of data processing where, we've heard the story about was it Facebook recently who, there was some big company who had data centers and they changed one part of a variable to pass in by reference instead of by value. And they were able to shut down like 5 data centers or 5 servers, something like that, where you need that person to know things. And now to your point, if you have somebody who's really good on the requirements and the collaboration, well, that app's been collaborated on for how many years and they couldn't figure this out. They send in one expert on it and it's solved and they've saved millions of dollars. So I think it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
if you have somebody who's really like customer facing, fine. But if you have something that's very highly technical, you have to have that person who can go in laser mode focus and just really understand the nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, and I don't think those are mutually exclusive either.
Isn't there?
Right. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive things either. I guess what I'm saying is talk to the humans, right? Like it's only going to become more valuable. The ability to get into a shared mind space with a team, with people is only going to become more valuable with the AI stuff, not less. And so that's sort of the point. Like, again, I'm not a doomer on the AI stuff. And I know you're not either, right? Like it's not like it's going to, I don't believe it's going to eliminate software engineering jobs. Like it might on the long run. I think on the short term, sure. Because people are like, well, I mean, we are like this. Like, should we even hire? Like, can we just what makes sense to, should we just lean into these tools more instead of hiring people? Like it's a debate we're constantly having. And so like while things are getting shaken out, like it's going to be disruptive, but in the long run, I'd expect it to just cause more code to get written, not shrink it.
But like to your point of, you have to understand the outcome because those AI editors, they don't really know. I mean, they know what you're asking it for, and they have a pretty good idea of what to do, but they just don't know if it actually.
It's like the meme, right? Like it's like the meme. Oh, AI will automate away all software jobs. All I have to do is give it the good requirements. It's like, okay, cool. So all software jobs are safe. But that is, I mean, that's a cliche and a meme because it's true, right? Like, fundamentally what a good programmer does is break down, needs into a logical flow, right? Like that's fundamental. And to your point, there's an idiosyncratic nature to whether it's memory management or whatever the thing is, the lower level thing. But fundamentally what programming is doing is just taking that stuff and formalizing it and thinking through the edge cases and thinking through all that type of stuff. So yeah, I mean the tools can be great, but human your ability to communicate and rationalize and absorb things from other humans is the scarce resource in a lot of ways, right? Like, because the ability to write code isn't a scarce resource anymore.
Coding's easy,
right? Yeah,
coding itself is easy. Writing
coding's always been the easy part.
Is hard.
I remember I said this once because we were working on a board presentation for a Fortune 500 bank, and I had some stuff. I forget exactly what I was saying, but it was basically saying something to the effect of like, coding's the easy part. And one of the CIOs made me take it out because he's like, I don't know. Like, I don't think we want to say that. I was like, but I really do. I still do think that it was a funny conversation, but I really do think like the hard part is understanding what you need to build and keeping it healthy and all those different things in the full application lifecycle. Like, as you've seen with all the stuff on Twitter or whatever, or if you just call it X, all the vibe coding, like people can spin up an entire app just talking to the AI. And I believe that, and that's cool and that's fun. It's crap at trying to do the whole life cycle though. And that's what the enterprise is about, the life cycle, right? Like startups don't care about the life cycle. We used to joke, our old CTO, we used to make the joke that, he knew his hair was on fire. He didn't care because he thought he could outrun the fire. It would never actually get to his scalp because he would just run faster than it could burn. And that was sort of that mentality. And I think that's pretty common in the startup world. Like they don't care about a day two problem. But the enterprise it's all day two. Like there's very little day one, in comparison, because there's just hundreds of apps that get built up, right?
You have to at an enterprise. You have to. You have one small data breach, and now millions of customers' data are on the internet. Whereas with a startup, it's just the risk is still there, but there's not as much of a reach.
All right. So last question before we break, turn it something sort of similar to what was asked earlier, but kind of take it up a level. Let's say you own a product. Let's say you're like assigned to something that isn't going anywhere. It's not providing value. Like maybe it's a product that's, maybe it was like a vanity project for a leader who's no longer there, or
I feel like you're talking
whatever.
About something very specific here.
I could be. There's actually numerous things I'm thinking of that could be like, but you're that director that's stuck on that thing. What's our advice to them, right? Like if they're like, well, I want to ship value. I want to be, but I know the role that I have actually is inherently not valuable because the things I'm being asked to do are not valuable. And they're just stuck in this weird place where maybe there's a leadership change or something. It's in this limbo, but it's been in limbo for 6 months. It's probably going to be in limbo for another 6 months. Like, what do I do? What do we tell that person?
So there's two parts of this one. I'm going to start with the most obvious one, at least to me. Might not be in others, but to me, the most obvious is kick the most ass you can in that project and just crush it. Because if the product goes nowhere, and if that that gets squashed, at least you're the person who delivered that on time, under budget, with a team that can go crush anything now. So you might not agree with it. You might not have the value statement, but what you do have is that reputational credit built up from delivering that. So the second part of that is to start hedging your bets against, well, is this going to get shut down? And start asking the question, which I've done, is starting to build up, what is the value of this? What are we trying to provide? What are the metrics? What's the success criteria? And start to build that up so that, if it goes nowhere, at least you've built up those reps and those muscles of yourself of how to navigate some of these on a project that it might not go anywhere, but what do you have to lose, right? You've just now built yourself up quite a bit by doing these hard things, asking these hard questions that you might not be comfortable doing.
Okay. So good. What about the other tack to take around getting out of Dodge, right? Like either looking for another gig or within the company or outside, right? Like how should they think about, I mean, I have my own thought on this one, but I'm curious to hear yours first. Like, how do they think about how to make that decision?
What do you have to
Like
lose?
when's the right time to start looking?
So let's just say you're in a dead end. What you see as a dead end role, right? You think that your product or your app could get shut down. Well, that's actually an opportunity to try these new things. And it's to try to build up new tactics that, hey, well, if they don't work out, so what? The app is going to be dead in 3 or 4 months anyway. But at least you built these up these new skills and say, hey, you know what? I've tried to do something new and it didn't work out. But what if it does? What if it does work, that you've asked some questions or you've made the right connection, the right network, that you can turn this thing around? Because to the point of, well, providing value, you could also be providing value by asking those questions that maybe somebody else in another role, they haven't done yet. And so now by you asking those questions, you're kind of helping them to reframe what they might see as that product and help turn it around. I guess what I'm saying here is use it as an opportunity to try some new things that are very low risk in your situation. That might be high risk in another situation. And then if they don't work out, it's really the writing's on the wall. Well, at least you did try. At least you looked to try to turn that around for yourself, for your own skills, for the app, because, you're there to provide value. And these are all tactics that you could take.
Cool. All right. You didn't really answer my question, but
and that was on purpose, though. I mean, that was a bit on purpose because, it's not so cut and dry. It's not so
yeah. No, for sure. For sure. You're leaning on the hey, be grateful for the position you're in and do the best you can with what you have. And you're really focusing on that.
You can try new things in that way.
Yeah.
It would be high risk also.
No. What I was sort of driving at was the idea of, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I just think there's also another category of like, when people, because I remember having this conversation with one person who I actually just learned today did end up leaving that role voluntarily. They were asking for advice, and what I told them was, in your career, until you get to a very senior position, and even then, other than CEO, you still have a boss. Who your boss is as a person and, as a persona and all those different things is, their skills and character and leadership are probably the most important things that's going to determine your ability to be successful and your ability to grow. Right. And so, what I did say to this person was, evaluate that. And if that's not something that if the person you're working for doesn't do it for you, then, look around and find the people you admire and talk to them about potential roles and just say, hey, like, is there anything that you think that I could grow in or anything in your space you think I could be useful or how do you think about my skills or my abilities or whatever, and have those conversations. That's within the organization. I think generally speaking, it's good to start there. Obviously that you should have a conversation with your boss before you go do that. It's not a good thing to have your boss surprised by one of his or her peers telling him that, Jason was asking me about a job. Is everything okay? Like you don't want to have that conversation. But that's usually a good place to start. But then it's the same thing when like selecting a job too, right? Like who your boss is and the way they see the world and all those things is a huge thing. Doesn't mean you can't take, ownership for it yourself and you should take ownership for it yourself and, work to be as successful as you can. But that's also a really important predictor, of how you're going to grow. Like, the bosses I've had, by and large have been amazing and have all helped me in a number of ways. But I've also worked for people that didn't help and you can tell the difference and they're pretty obvious. And so, that's generally the place where I would go.
And the point I'm trying to make with my statement before is that before going to your boss and saying that all the things that you had mentioned,
Yeah.
going with some ammunition of, hey, look, here's what I'm trying, XYZ. Here's what I've documented. Here's everything I'm doing to try to, get this into a better shape. Here's what I'm doing for myself. Here's my own personal growth plan for going through this. This isn't really working out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you now put yourself as a person who's going the extra mile to try to turn things around. And then your boss says, oh, hey, holy crap, Duncan just did all this work. Yeah. Okay. He's right. Let's see what we can do to help him out. And you're turning your boss into more, oh, Duncan's here again, he's complaining about his app, to, well, Duncan's here, he's putting in all that extra work. And now it's pretty justifiable that he deserves something else.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think, yeah, like I said, I didn't disagree with anything you were saying. It's just a different point and kind of how you get there, right? The thing is you don't want to just bail. Like, you don't want to be those people who just bails. It's not usually, bailing sometimes is the right thing, but you shouldn't just bail, right? Like, there's, you have to work through it. Well, cool. Anything else we should hit? Value creation.
That's a tough one. These are tough conversations, but it's not common. But they are valuable to talk about value to your team, so that it's something that is common. It's just it's one of those repetition topics to bring up, and once it's there, it starts to snowball.
You say it like I'm always wondering if I should say these things out loud. I think that in some of these corporate environments, especially big enterprises, my impression is a lot of people realize that they don't actually do much. They don't actually move the needle individually. And like, if they didn't show up for work for a month, people would miss them as a person, but their output, they wouldn't really notice or miss it that much. And in some ways it's like a low level scam, right? Like, not to call everybody scammers, but there's, I think that there's a part of people's minds that actually gives them anxiety because they don't think about the value stuff because they're scared of thinking about it. Because if they thought about it, they'd realize they don't ship that much value. And then they'd be like, oh God, there's the downstream thoughts that come from that. And what I would say, and this is why I kind of came up with that exercise that we did in the sprint thing, is, don't hide from the monster, right? Like, look it in the face. Because if it's going to give you anxiety, it's there. Like, figure it out. Like, okay, like, hey, if I'm not providing value and a budget crunch comes along and I'm likely to be on the chopping block because people could live without me being here, then you should fix that. Like, don't just pull the covers over your head and hope it goes away, because it won't, right? It's only going to get worse over time. And so, if everything we're talking about, we're almost an hour in. So if you've been listening for this long, if we're terrifying you with what we're talking about, then that's probably a call to action, right? Like, go and really dig into this question and ask yourself, okay, and ask your boss. Like, don't be scared to ask your boss. Like, hey, like, what's the value proposition of my role? Which is a weird thing to ask, and people kind of look at you weird, but then you
got to have a good trust with your boss to ask that direct of a question. You've got to have good trust.
Yeah, sure. And it's like,
come out of the blue and say, what's the value of my role? And you've been there for 5 years. Well, you probably should have been asking me this 5 years ago, but there's a nice way to ask that.
It's better. It's like, I think it's like a performance conversation, right? Like, you maybe don't use those words. Maybe you say something like, how can I help move the needle for you this year, or something like that. Like, you could phrase it more for them, but really drive at it and say, okay, like, hey, what matters? Go up the chain. You don't have to go talk to everybody up the chain, but just kind of think it through your head, scenarioize it out. Like, what matters and how can you help? Like, seriously, like, we did this. I'm not sure if we talked about this already, but my last role at the banks was kind of like an advisory, consultative sort of chief engineer role for one of the CIOs that ran a big business unit area, right? And we would have lots of conversations around, like, what are the key things? Like, what do we call them? We call them, like, I forget exactly what we call them, but we had this term for it. But basically, like, there's one or two things a year for somebody at that level that if those two things go well, nothing else really matters. Like, everything else could be a dumpster fire. Nobody's going to think about that. They're only going to think about the two things that went well. And the inverse is true. You could do everything perfectly. You could be the best boss in the world, have all your ducks in a row, all those different things. But if those two things don't go well, then you'll get fired, right? Like maybe not quite that dramatic, but it'll be bad, right? And so understand what those are. Understand what those choke points are for your boss or your boss, like however far up you need to go to understand what those things are, and then make sure they're successful. And that's probably a key place. But if this stresses you out, if it gives you anxiety, that's a sign that you're not solving for this problem. And you should provide more value to your employer than you take away. And if you don't, then essentially what's happening is you're waiting around for them to realize that. And
they might already realize it, and they might already have a plan in place.
Yeah, exactly. So the best thing you could do is just take it into your hands and just be somebody who they're thrilled with the exchange that's happening. And and again, it's not a personal thing. Like, I mean, obviously it's very personal. People get laid off or fired or whatever. It's very personal. But and in the moment, obviously becomes a personal thing. But for you personally, getting ahead of it with making sure the value proposition is there, then you just don't have to worry about it the same way. Because and even if for some reason like the budget really gets cut that much, and you, even though they don't want to lose you, and they're trying to protect you, they just don't have the money to pay, because the business is in trouble. Like, if you've done all those other things, you'll have no trouble getting scooped up somewhere else. And so it's just taking the bull by the horns and really living that empowered life. So cool. What else?
Today? This is tough.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Not too bad. We'll be all right. I think we'll survive. But yeah, no, it's good. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. And thanks to everybody. And we'll talk to you soon. That's a wrap for this episode of Tech Council, brought to you by DevGrid. Thanks for joining us as we dive into building smarter solutions for the enterprise. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, leave us a rating, and share your thoughts on X, at DevGrid Inc., or at devgrid.io. Stay tuned for our next episode where we'll explore more ways to thrive in the enterprise. Until then, keep building.